Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time you've all been waiting for. So grab a hold of your pocket protectors and join us for Nerd World!
Hello.
Welcome to NerdWorld.
Colin, how are you? Let me turn on gallery view.
I'm well, thanks. JS, you with us?
I am here.
We have Angel, we have JS, we have a few other.
It was partly cloudy out, and I was thinking, oh great, I'll get better results from all my stuff in the cloud. But now it's all sunny and I don't see any clouds, so they're all far away from me. So I'll probably not be getting good reception, right?
Well, on the bright side, you won't be hearing people tell you to put things right in the cloud and it'll solve your problem because there are no clouds.
So I'm everybody's good except for a little echo on everybody except for Colin. So I wonder if Colin, when you're not talking, you can mute and kill that audio feedback.
I can experiment with something 1 second.
Angel, how are you?
Is this an improvement? No.
No.
Okay.
I'm in Canada every day, so
Zoom
awesome.
mute yourself. Colin. Let's see if it goes.
Do they have computers in Canada now?
Just one. There, good. So when you're not talking, Colin, just mute. Go ahead. Sorry, guys.
You're good, John. I think, JS, most of us do now. I think most of us are out of the igloos at this stage. So.
Oh, cool. So you have cars and computers and.
Yeah, I think we're there now.
And do you have like decent beer, or is it still just Molson?
Yeah, I think most of us are drinking decent beer by now. I think this guy named Elon Musk is trying to make sure we actually have internet everywhere too now. So.
Wow. Okay.
We're on our way, eh?
Hey, so we have a special guest on today, and Nerd World is all about infrastructure, and he's under a timeline hard out at 12:30. So I want to get Jeff Ames on board. Jeff, go ahead and turn your camera, unmute yourself, come into the panel.
Hello.
There he is, Mr. Jeff Ames, everybody. Jeff is a fellow nerd. Jeff and I have known each other, I don't know, 20 plus years from
30.
Probably 30 years.
Yeah, you're old now, John.
Jeff I'm going to let him tell his bio. Jeff is the ex-CTO of Switch Communicate. Well, I don't know what the last word in their title is now. Switch Communication still?
Yeah, I think so.
New York Stock Exchange traded company, one of the top 10 at least data colo centers in the world.
No, it's the number one.
Is it number one?
As far as I'm concerned.
And Jeff has a lot of information about colo, data centers, infrastructure, cable, LANs, WAN, and we're happy to have you, Mr. Jeff Ames, everybody.
Nice to be here.
Jeff, tell us a little bit about your background and we'll point you in the right direction.
I'll give you a little short, as quick as I can. I spent several years working for EG&G, a Department of Energy contractor, in photonics and electro-optics back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. And when we were using, of course, the DARPANET and the original tools that became commercialized and the kicks and all that. And when I saw the internet coming, I took attrition, jumped out of the government and started first internet provider in Nevada. It was called Intermind. And
I was a customer.
Yeah. And just sort of opened my eyes to what's going on. And of course, being in photonics, electro-optics, in the fiber optic world and the government, we were using tools that were far exceeded what was going on in the communication world. And so I was kind of surprised when I came out.
Was that the government calling you right there? Probably.
What's that?
Was that the government calling you on your phone?
Yeah, they were telling me, shut up, don't say anymore. Anyway, so we had a opportunity to see that the communications world was, no disrespect, but they were far behind. We were worried about spot size and femtoseconds, and they're out there doing things where you're breaking off glass and putting it on a glue connector. I'm going, hey, I can do this. So I started working with Sun Microsystems and doing some things with them. And as the internet developed, just kind of grew with it. And in Nevada, the fiber infrastructure was starting to grow, and I got tapped and started helping a company called Sierra Pacific Power, or Sierra Pacific Communications, which was a spinoff of the utility for Nevada, the power company, who had overbuilt a whole bunch of glass for their monitoring and measurement and controls. And they wanted to commercialize some of that. So we spent a lot of time building fiber networks in Reno and in Las Vegas area. And then that kind of led me to run into a gentleman by the name of Rob Roy, who was started a little colocation company.
What year did you meet Rob?
That was about 2000, had to be around 2006, 2007.
Okay.
Maybe even before then. I apologize.
Earlier.
No, it goes back before then.
That was back when John was
Just
drinking a
before
lot of
2000.
Rob Roy's.
Because the economy had tanked, and he had grabbed a chunk of business that sort of fell out of some of the bigger guys who were flaming. They were just falling apart. And I needed a place to put in my network monitoring gear. And he had this little colo that he picked up from a company called Excel that had long distance telephone cards, you might remember. Nortel, you guys remember that. The place that he got had a weird complexion of fiber carriers that went through there. And I said, well, this is a good place for me. So we took a little space and turned that on. And I said, where's your internet? He goes, well, I got a little guy in here. I said, no, I think you're sitting on gold here. Let's build an internet core. And we did. And we ended up taking advantage of the downturn and picking up some big giant Cisco GSR routers, $250,000. We could get them for 70 grand. And we were turning them up pretty soon. We were getting all the internet business from all the hotels and the big entities in the Vegas area. And then there was an Enron building at Lamb and Sahara that was never built for Las Vegas. It was actually one of the 3 legs to support California. And 23 long haul providers had gotten together there, and through a consortium, they'd been building fiber. They spent a couple $1 trillion together building fiber all over the nation. And this was the only place where all 23 of them came up in the exact same location. And we saw that, and of course, that's when Enron was tanking. That's when they were preparing their big web auction. And we had to go to the bankruptcy judge, the liquidator, and to everybody involved, including all 23 long haul providers, and inform them that we're going to bid on this building. And it was actually separated out of their web from everything else they auctioned on the web. And lo and behold, we won the bid. And without disclosing what we paid, it was a coup, because I was just dying to get into that sparing cage and see what was in there. And I knew the fiber was there. And again, the fiber was there as a pass-through point. It was one of 3 legs for redundancy for Southern California primarily, but also for Northern California and for Salt Lake City. And so they had a sparing cage, and I knew there was stuff in there. We'd never get in there. But after we got the keys, I went to that sparing cage, and there was 1 box of GSR blades in there that was worth more on the resale market than everything we paid for the building. So then we went back to those carriers who we had to get to know at the CEO or the C-level to get these signatures on our ability to bid on this building. They were all watching their own puddle of blood then, so they weren't too concerned about this building. Any one of them should have stopped us, but they didn't. They were watching their own pain, and they just said, all we want to do is have your commitment that if you get this place, you'll keep it up so we can stay in here and keep going. We said, of course. Well, we circled back after the purchase, and we said, we want you to step off there. Well, that was an investment for them. So we happened to have some gear. There was 8 GSR routers in that building. There was a $2 million DC power plant waiting to use. And so
Teradici router too.
Yeah. So we tied them all together, and we ended up with multi-redundant paths to multi-redundant carriers with really great rates. And it was kind of like I use the analogy of a bowling ball on a trampoline. Kind of everything started rolling to us, just the gravity. And then we did some things unique in the business early on, where instead of like most data centers where they would charge you a cross connect for a fiber toss between the carrier and you. We got the customers sitting with us on our side of the table and used economy of scale and went to the carriers and said, hey, no, we want the best prices you can give us on the planet for, as it led to in the future, big DWDM waves between locations for the prices most people were paying for T1s. And we ended up just, again, more and more gravity to that grew and grew and grew. And then we started to discover the challenges in the data center space. For 40 years, the guys have been doing it the same way, where they were brute force cooling buildings to manage their power and cooling. And I saw a disconnect between the server manufacturers, who we went and visited, and the data center guys, that they're pounding 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. Ended up with these data centers where you could only sell 2 racks in a giant room because the cooling was so inefficient. So through a long process and actually ended up being a couple hundred patents, we devised and designed the buildings so that the cool space is one level. All the heat is contained in what we call a thermal skiff. The hot air goes up to the next level, and it's all managed through a series of multiple choices of cooling and filtering and management. And that became super efficient to where we could pack them in now. And that, coupled with the fact that now by this time the carriers are all going, hey, this is exciting. They were dropping their petabyte cores in there. They're dropping in their terabyte feeds. We had all of the big cloud guys there, all of the studios who wanted to get their stuff out of California, or at least have, some of them started off as a backup site in Nevada, because all it ever does is get hot there. And incidentally, perfectly hot, because the average is 73 degrees, and that's the average we wanted for the temperature for the rooms. So it's dry, so we could use evaporative a lot of the year, which saved a ton of money. And then as it grew and grew and grew, we ended up, as it is today, where we've got data centers in Reno, Michigan. We just bought Data Foundry in Texas in a project with Dell. We've got one in Milan, we've got in Asia, and it's just growing and growing, and we've done quite well. Well, backing up a little bit.
How big a space was this building? How many
well, each one is about 11 football fields big. And there's I think now up to, there's 11 in Vegas, there's I think 6 or 8, and there's a huge campus in Reno. That's gonna grow like crazy. We put one of the largest solar projects up there to certify green. We're up there by the Giga battery plant up in that area. We got the efficiencies and the processes that came out of all of that kind of generated what we call the cost of presence, the cost of having that power, that compute power, the bandwidth, the security, the tri-redundancy on power, all of those things become cheaper for a company like Google or a company like Microsoft to put in big clouds than building their own. And that's kind of what's happened. And backing up a little bit, in between those times when I was building fiber, we made a lot of friends in that space. So one of the really good guys that came on board had been working with the long haul carriers, and they ended up developing, since I've left, I left in 2010, I've been goofing off since then, but they've developed a global network, private network, as well as having these multiple carriers, and everything's about redundancy and uptime, and you guys know the drill. So it was a great ride. It was super fun. We went from 0 to about $3 billion in less than 12 years. And when it got over, so many people, so many employees, that one time I was at dinner, and my son, who also worked there, were having dinner, and a young man came up and said, "Hi, Jeff," and talked to me for a few minutes and went away. And my son said, "You don't even know who that was, do you?" I said, "I really don't." He goes, "He works for you." Oh, and then I knew it was too big. And then I knew it was time to go to the beach and goof off. So about 2010, I checked out. I'm still an owner. I still enjoy following what's going on, but it's like a bullet train. Once you step off at the station, it's gone. And so I don't keep up with all of it like I used to, but it's fascinating. And then I watch these things happening. Like I watched this article yesterday. I saw one about crypto mining in New York that inefficient data center, terribly inefficient data center, is using cold water from a lake, and it got so hot the lake's 108 degrees. They're blowing it. They're doing it all wrong.
So dump a lot of crab boil into that lake
Yeah,
to really make
yeah.
it make sense.
It's crazy. So that's my story. There's more to it. You know, in my years of the government, we worked on what I would fictionally refer to as Ronnie's ray gun. We worked on the Star Wars initiative and had a lot of fun doing that. Didn't make much money, but had a lot of fun doing that. And so the last
how close
2 years
is this to actually being Skynet?
Yeah.
Hey,
Is it
Jeff.
close to like
Yes, sir.
Skynet?
I want.
Do we need to be afraid?
Yes,
we
be
should
very
be.
afraid.
AI and neural net, that's what you should be afraid of.
I think that we'd be remiss in not mentioning our good mutual friend, Mr. Michael McGee.
Oh yeah, my brother Mike.
So Michael was a big reason why this venture was successful. Sorry, Colin, I keep muting you while you're not talking because of the feedback. So just so you know. And Michael used to work in the office there at the original Colo with his partner. There was no space, so they worked in the bathroom. Their offices were in the bathroom. Michael, I don't know, was in the woman's side and Kurt on the other side. But this place grew out of a little office complex next to a sandwich shop into the behemoth that it is today. I was one of the first commercial customers in that building. I had a 10 by 10 a Colo in that facility, and that's where we grew Hello Network from the ground up. It's been an amazing ride, and Jeff has got to ride on the ride. I got kicked out. We all had special deals with Rob, and then he became too formal and kicked us all out, and we had to go away.
Stephen Caggiano asked if Jeff knows Bill Joy.
Who is it?
From Sun Micro?
Bill Joy?
From Sun Microsystems? That Bill Joy? It's got to be. There's no other Bill Joy.
Bill Joy. Well, I knew Scott McNeely. Scott McNeely was.
I knew him too.
Close. He actually was kind of funny because one of the trips we made up there to Sun to meet with Scott, they were working on these projects where they were putting these boxes, basically they're transportainers or containers that they were retrofitting to hold servers so they could helicopter crane them on the top of buildings that were out of server space. And ironically, as we're studying this thing and realizing they're putting these 12 racks of systems in these containers, we were looking at this and it's like, it hit us. It's crazy that, as you guys remember, the old data center model was a raised floor, all the cabling's underneath, real pretty, and you're trying to force cool air, up and warm air out, and it just, it was like backwards. And that's when we realized it's time to switch this around and contain that heat and do something with it. You actually can use the heat to cool with if you follow my grip. So it was a 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm at the hotel, and Rob and I had both crashed kind of late, and I get a phone call. Hey, we got to talk about this. And that's when we took our first big building and we were halfway through it. We had filled the bottom floor, and it was filling as fast as we could build the cages. The top floor, we flipped things around. We took the Lieberts that used to sit against the wall and cool. We flipped those around, and we cooled directly into the cabinet space on the front side, contain the heat on the back side. It's sort of a chimney effect, so that we were able to not just blend that air in a room and fight against yourself. It's so simple. It's like, duh, how come nobody thought of this? And it was funny because when we were designing the first big building, we brought in all the experts from Liebert and everything. And these are great guys, smart guys. They come in and pat us on our little head and say, well, yes, boys, but we've been doing this way for 40 years. Yeah, and it worked.
Yeah, well, they want to sell you their products with their ducting arrangements, and this is,
It's just funny,
Yeah.
And we had, what was hilarious.
I had one quick question, then our lovely and brilliant Angel Hill had a question for you. So did you use any kind of geothermal cooling?
No, we've studied that, and it's still an experiment. They're still experimenting. The problem is you eventually warm the ground. It's kind of a dog chasing its tail thing. we did some thermodynamic studies on that and some fluid dynamic studies on liquid cooling, and just couldn't quite, it doesn't pencil unless you're in an environment like Iceland and you can you can drill down and deep enough and long enough, enough places.
Are there a lot of data centers in Iceland? I don't think so.
There are a couple.
Bitcoin mining in Iceland, tons of.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's true, because they can get power for free and they can get cooling pretty cheap. But again, they're really not on the big fiber feeds. They're kind of parsed out, so it's kind of a trade-off. The solar plant up there in Reno is a good. It literally produces enough power to call the whole campus green. Obviously, you don't store it, but it solves a big part of the problem. But geothermal was looked at real closely, and it just didn't pencil, because after a couple of years, the ground would actually get warm, and it doesn't do you any good.
Angel, go ahead with your question.
Jeff, I got to say, you were such a delight, because I owned a computer store for over 10 years, and I've been around nerds and geeks my whole life. I am a nerd and geek. I've built computers for a long time. So, you're around geeks all the time, right? And you hear them talk. And not that you guys aren't interesting. I love you guys, but you're not this interesting. And so I just got to say, Jeff, like,
Well, thank
you're
you.
telling your
We
story.
appreciate it.
And I was like on the edge of my seat. My heart was racing listening to you. And I was like, this story is so good. So here's my question for you, because also in my work now, the work that I do is very much around, do what you love and find your passion. And, it's really important to do that. And I think listening to you, I was like, this guy isn't just doing his thing. There's an underlying, I think you were on a bigger mission. So can you tell me, like, was there a bigger purpose and mission driving all this stuff? I got to hear it.
There kind of was. What was kind of funny to us was 5 years before this event I'm going to tell you about happened, was around the time that we were up there at Sun and we were watching this whole movement. We had a meeting, and we had the big cooling guys in, Liebert and some of the others, and we had IBM in talking about their latest, greatest giant servers. And when we told them, listen, guys, you've got this current data center, this 6,000 square foot space that you have here can only hold one server because the power and cooling. And you should have seen the looks on their faces, like they hadn't talked. The server guys are still pounding more stuff in the box, and the cooling guys are going, we'll just sell some more Lieberts, And it was so environmentally stupid. And then I said, you know what, Rob, there's going to be a day when people are going to protest Facebook data centers because they're power hogs. And it actually happened. In the meantime, between those times is when we started developing ways. It was about, how can we do this the most efficient way and get the most bang for the buck? Because the biggest cost for all of this is power. It really is. And that's not going down. So the whole bottom line to the data center industry, the whole profit is, the biggest cost is power, the next one's people. So you try to do the most efficient amount of people. And how can you do, and it's kind of personal too, because it's an environmental thing too. I mean, it's a carbon footprint thing. We were the largest power customer in the state of Nevada, over all of the strip hotels. So if you don't do that right, you're doing everything wrong. And so it was a real passion to try to figure out a way to do this the correct way. And so it did drive us. It was fun. And we had a lot
Did it ever occur to you that opening up a giant brothel might be easier and you could make as much money?
I thought about that, but there's so many viruses you can get.
Well,
yeah, and the viruses are so much more unpleasant. Losing your data is one thing, but some of these things are not so good. I wanted to get your input on, a couple years ago, there was talk of Google and Microsoft building floating data centers on barges and, submersible setups to manage cooling with seawater. It never struck me as particularly plausible. Is there anything to that sort of thing at all, do you think?
The closest thing I've seen that I thought makes sense is, I wonder, is there's I forget who's doing it, but it was in Europe, and they built a data center on land, but they ran water out. They ran the cooling out into the ocean, and they'd cycle it back. It wasn't actually using the ocean water, it was using the ocean's coldness to cool the cooling liquids back to the center. The problem with all of the rest of that is, oh my gosh, the corrosion issues, the constant movement, every time I've read about that, it's never really panned out. There's one company that has an underwater data center. I don't know, man. I mean, it's like putting a flat roof.
You have to get the employees to hold their breath for like really long
and the ones that are going to
leak.
The one that I always enjoyed was Sealand. Do you remember these guys? They put a data center in an old World War II gunnery platform 12 miles off the coast of England.
Okay.
Somewhere in the North Sea. They didn't do anything about seawater cooling or anything. But their whole thing was, it was sort of a legal gray area, so you could get all sorts of shady colo customers. I guess they ended up getting having a fire in their structure, and they burned out everything and didn't get their business back up and running.
Well, the other problem too is, again, it's like we had big clients come to town in Vegas there or wherever, and they'd say, we're going to build our own and we're going to do it over here. So, okay, but how are you going to connect to everybody? It still costs you $100,000 a mile to build fiber. What are you going to do? How are you going to, and it doesn't pencil unless you've got all of the ecosystem. You have to have the connectivity, you have to have the ability to get power, you have to have security, and you have to have cooling. And if you don't have any one of those, you can drive yourself nuts trying to get around it. A lot of these guys, with the advent, one thing that has changed is with virtual computing and the way everything is really kind of moved now. A lot of the big users, of course, chasing the sun, they're chasing the weather. They're moving their processes to where it's cooler. So different times of day, they're running those things in different parts of the globe. And that has changed things. Additionally, having an outage in one side of the world, you can move process to the other side of the world. That kind of provides a level of redundancy that goes beyond the data center. So there are some of those things that took a lot of the punch out of the story. But the bulk of, most of them have locations in other places. All of our big clients do. And one of the things, I'll give you an example. There's one client who makes movies, I can't say their name, but they were looking at our location or looking at other locations, and they come to us, ask us for a bid. We said, we're not going to bid on the data center space because you're missing the point. Let's sit down and talk to the carriers and get your 10 gig waves between your sites. And it actually costs them less to be in our site and buy the bandwidth through our consortium than it did to pay us for our rent, because they save so much on the bandwidth connectivity, because they could get it so cheap. We were getting those waves that if they were out in a remote spot would cost them, 10, 12 grand a month. We were getting them for $1,800. So when you lay that out across the globe, they were saving money.
I'll take one of those, Jeff.
Yeah, I know, huh?
Hey, Jeff, so are you finding with the data centers that there's any kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard? Or people okay with having a data center being next door?
We haven't really had, I haven't seen that. In fact, in some cases, I think some communities with great intent, and I think probably some misunderstanding, embrace data centers. Like, I'll give you an example. Google, of course, built one right there on, near Warm Springs and Boulder Highway. And of course, the city gave them all kinds of abatements. The state gave them abatements. and they're thinking, wow, this is great. Google's building this big giant data center and woo woo. And the fact is, once it's built, the 2 years of great jobs for the union guys building it are nice. But once it's built, you can run a place like that with, a very few amount of people. It just sits there and hums. So a lot of times it's embraced because they think the name, the brand, the amount of dollars, but at the end of the day, it's kind of just sits there and hums. So we haven't had anybody give us any real grief. The biggest challenges we ran against and one were, of course, the utilities. NV Energy did not want us to be an actual energy trader. We had to go through the PUC, we had to go to legislation, and we won. And Switch is now a power trader. They have their own certified team that buys and sells power. That freed up some of the casinos that joined that battle to do their own thing so that they could save some money. So of course the utilities didn't like that. They didn't want, what's funny is they still get their pound of flesh because no matter what you do, if you use their line to transmit, you got to pay them anyway. So then they forced us, or didn't force us, but we wanted a third substation in one case. And we had to fund it, build it, buy the land, provide it, make it all happen, and then give them the keys because that's how they roll, right? Which, whatever, but usually we haven't had anybody come back and say, no, I don't want that there, because they're clean and they're efficient and they're, we got armed security there, I've never had a problem with that.
And what about security? Because it seems to me like there's three parties generally involved in the security: the people who maintain the data center, the companies that utilize the services of the data center, the co-locators and so forth, and then the individuals who are doing cloud computing via those facilities as well. It seems to me like there's been a lot lately about exposure, and we're hearing every day about more and more ways that cyber criminals are getting in, all kinds of problems. What can you speak to about what's going on now, or what you know about in terms of trying to protect people? And
I
note the time, Jeff. Note the time. I'm worried about your time.
Okay, I'm having fun now. Angel's right. I'm having a good time up in here. And by the way, a lot of my family's up in a little town called Paris by Toronto, my dad's side. So I love Paris.
Oh, far out, Paris, Ontario.
There you go.
I'm in Barrie, so.
Okay. Well, anyway, so from the data center point of view, of course, obviously we have our own network for monitoring and business, but it's kind of like a high-tech condo. We give them their space, they're on their own. I mean, so the entities that are either renting the space or their customers within their space are responsible for their own security issues. Of course, we do everything we can. Physical security, like I said, we hire a lot of vets with guns, and the place is protected. But the cybersecurity is an ongoing challenge. I read yesterday that average of 450 successful hacks a day in major corporations. It's a mess, and I think you mentioned earlier when we were tuning up about people dragging their poison with them forward, thinking they're doing their backup, and then they're bringing and restoring, and what they're doing is leaving the same holes that the exploiters exploit. The NSA, we did some consulting with them. I got to be careful because my last few years, my job was interacting with the government and doing special projects. So I was doing things with the thing called.
Well, we should have ran one of those filters on your voice so you would and put the little black bar across your eyes.
It might have Gilberted on them though. We don't want to start that again.
We weren't thinking.
Well, we had on the commercial side, we had this thing called ultraviolet where it was Sony and Microsoft, Sony Studios and Microsoft, and all of the device makers with the exception of Apple, and all of the studios with the exception of Disney, all got together around the globe once a quarter, and we'd meet and we'd split into working teams. And that's how they developed all of the encryption and keys and handoffs between that make it possible to stream things. Now, ultraviolet was available on DVDs and however you bought your movie, it would transport. Well, ultraviolet closed recently, because it's out now, it's done. The other side of it was and talk about paranoid security guys. Those guys were as tight as anybody.
Now you're talking about the DVD encryption keys. Weren't those?
Well,
cracked?
anybody who produces a movie is extremely concerned about security because they do not want to lose that movie out and get it out before they want it out and miss the money on it.
Yeah.
So those were some intense discussions on security. The NSA we did some consulting with, and the FBI and the Secret Service, and the industry. I think a lot of this stuff that's going on today is because a lot of the people involved in the security of those places. I won't say, this sounds mean, and I don't mean it this way. It's not that they're lazy, but it's kind of overwhelming because there's so many moving parts. It's so fluid. They do their very best, but again, what's that Russian security software everybody was putting on everything? Kasina, what's it called? Kasina. Just recently in the news is now the key that got them into the back door of all kinds of big companies. I'm telling them, why are you putting a Russian security software on your desktop? You know, and so there's a lot of misunderstanding. But I believe we're going to see in the next
Kaspersky or whatever. He was like one of the leading the
antivirus
softwares was Kaspersky.
Yeah, and they just moved right into every corporate server, every corporate desktop, all over the place. And you could buy the disc at Best Buy, and and I'm like, what are we doing here? Because there was a McAfee was spinning off and being weird, and so everybody was jumping away from McAfee and from Norton, and they were going to Casina. I can't think of the name of it.
I think it was Kaspersky.
There you go, something like that. And I'm watching this thing. So I think in the next year or two, what I'm hearing in legislation, I think people are taking a lot more seriously, and they're going to have to spend some money. One of the fascinating things to me was they found out, and of course, think what you might about Snowden, but he exposed you can take a fiber, and without breaking it, you can bend it, and enough light activity, enough of those photons fly out of that bend where you can capture the data. And so what some people were doing, we won't say their names, is they were catching every packet across glass, which included every transmission happening to and from that device. But I know now, and without any light loss. So you weren't seeing it on, normally you would see that if there's some kind of interruption, you'd see that. Well, if you get that microfracture and you get those photons coming out, they were stealing data. And they were dropping these devices parallel to every fiber line in and out of the United States and other places in the world, and bringing all that data up to Hill Air Force Base. So that's our guys. That's quote unquote the good guys, right? So what are the bad guys doing? And I think it's a real problem. I think that it's going to take a couple years, and it's going to take some legislation, and it's going to take some money, because some people can't afford to do what they got to do to get it right.
Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, in a way, I'm sorry, go ahead, Angel.
I just wanted to thank you for saying that.
My pleasure.
I was just going to say, in a way, aren't we all a data center? We're all basically connected via our devices and things like that. Don't I have a little data center in my pocket, sometimes called the cell phone?
You do, especially if you're well, like for example, just because I'm an Apple guy, just because it's easy and I'm old, if I'm using my iCloud, I'm attached to many data centers. And so if I drop my phone in the pool, well, not this one, it's waterproof, but if I drop my phone in the pool, I can restore it because I'm attached to a data center through my Wi-Fi, so it's so wonderful. It's such a neat thing to have, but it's also very vulnerable. I get concerned about security. I do.
Jeff, I have a question.
Sure.
I saw a distinct bifurcation between co-location and cloud computing. In our specific case, as an IT user, we switched over to AWS right when they first opened.
Sure.
And we did modeling that showed that it was cheaper for us to use AWS back then, up to a certain point, about $100K per month.
Mhm.
And then it became cheaper for us to manage our own colo at that point. There's an interesting polynomial curve on the ROI for colo versus cloud computing. And how did and colo, I haven't heard the term colo in years and years anymore.
Sure. Sure.
Amazon Web Services, for those that don't know, because there's a lot of value in knowing that.
This
Yeah,
is
and
nerd world. If you don't know what AWS stands for, then you're not on the right
But
side.
Angel works with the people that I'm sharing it out to users that don't know yet. So I'm just trying to educate them.
Well, here's the beauty part. So if I'm a data center and John wanted to colo and rent some couple of cabinets from me, cool. Or I could say, hey, John, let's throw you a fiber because AWS is in the other big giant room back here. So to me, it's all the same. It's a physical presence.
Yeah, you guys were big enough to have the cloud computers, but some of the smaller data centers that didn't have cloud providers in the same facility had tough times, I'm sure.
Right. And that's part of that thing I was talking about, because, once you've got AWS and you've got Cisco and the big cloud with the virtual guys and you've got others in there, you get to pick. And every day when they're racking up more gear, we're loving them. And my dividend comes and I go play with my grandkids.
This touches on a point I wanted to get your input on, that being net neutrality and the concept. But back, what was it? Toward the end of the Obama administration, net neutrality was a big deal again, right? And it ebbs and flows. But the discussion was, without net neutrality, carriers are going to charge end users specific fees to get from one service to another, and differing fees for differing services. Now, of course, what people seem to not understand, and you have a great depth of understanding of this, are the existence of peering agreements, which are exactly that.
Exactly.
The agreements between carriers to agree to carry data to their set of customers. And you guys, as you said, were at a nexus of many carriers. I want to get your thoughts on how peering agreements have served or not served the market.
I think they've served really well. There's some guys who tried to skirt around it and then they get burnt. What's fascinating to me about that whole thing, at least when I would attend some of those meetings, was those peering arrangements were handshakes, man. They were the guys sitting on top of those big pipes going, if you're going to send down, 3 terabytes down my pipe, I need 3 from you on this side. And they would just work it out, and it was fine. What shifted right around 2010, 2012 was the content guys used to be dependent on, for example, the cable companies. Yes, they charged them to have their show on, but they were the distribution that was dependent on their bandwidth and their network out to the end user. Well, when streaming starts really flying, look what's happened. The content guys can tell a cable company, hey, you better do what I want, or I'm going to not go down your network, and you're going to have every customer ticked off because you can't get to Facebook on Cox, for example. So it flipped, it changed things where the content is king and the carriers are secondary. And as we move toward 5G and other, broader band solutions, the options have gotten better for the end user. But back at the core, it's still those big peering agreements. And I think that some of these guys were these ILECs that had the local cable guys, the phone companies that brought in their DSL. All those guys were fighting to hold on to their monopolies, if you will, or their, usually there was only 1 or 2 cable guys in any city, and there's typically 1 ILEC and a couple CLECs in any town.
So if I remember, I'm trying to remember the acronyms, and our audience may not know them at all.
The incumbent line exchange carrier or the competitive. line
So
exchange.
they're effectively the local phone company that you're
Right.
talking about.
And
And
so
so they were
that's
providing
where you could
DSL
get internet.
service primarily at that time,
Right.
and they were the primary provider. And then of course the cable companies came in. They were the CLECs
Right.
that
The
could
cable company,
provide higher bandwidth.
started off as a direct competition, but only for content, for video and internet. They didn't. They later come up with, their soft switches and started doing voice over their networks. But it changed things when all of a sudden you've got multiple choices. But then when you go back to the back rooms of the guys at the top that are sitting there trading their bandwidth arrangements, it's still pretty much a handshake. It's still pretty much a gentleman's agreement. I mean, there are contracts in place, but we had a couple of guys that tried to go out and build around it, and they just get squashed because any one of them have to do, 3 or 4 of them get together and go, no, don't transport his stuff anymore. I'm not transporting you. And so it keeps it fair. It's interesting. It's very interesting. The net neutrality thing, my take on that is a lot of big, giant behemoths that wanted to keep their monopolies, spent a lot of money, paid a lot of lobbyists to get their way, but they're not going to win because the driving force is the end user, and it's just they're losing their footing. That's why Cox Cable and all the rest of them. You notice when they used to provide internet, it was $20. It was a side note on your bill. Well, now it's $90 or $100 in the television part. It's not going down, but it's not going because they know they're losing this part. When you look at AT&T's Now television, $30 a month looks with a DVR looks very much like a cable box in your house. You can watch everything that you can watch. Why would I pay Cox, $125 for television services when I can get everything I want? All I need from them is a big pipe. And if they won't give it to me, pretty soon I can get it, through my 5G or whatever. So it's interesting. It's a wild frontier still. That's my take on it. I think it's not settled.
Hey, Jeff, I got a quick one. My question is, I'm trying to get some visibility on the roadmap for backplane speeds. And so I'm seeing consumer stuff jump up to 10 gig now, pretty readily affordable. On the backplane, what do you see coming? 100 gig, 400 gig, terabyte backplane speeds in the data centers? What visibility you have there?
Absolutely. I think, and I haven't been tracking it, to be honest with you, I haven't been tracking it in a couple of years. I haven't really looked, but you could see that coming. It's kind of the bottleneck. So I think you're going to see that widen and widen in time. There's a lot of focus on that right now.
So what do they have in Switch now? Is it 100 gig backplane? Is that what they're using?
I don't know. Because again, I've been out. Like I said, you step off the bullet train and there's some brilliant guys in there taking care of business, and I love them, especially every quarter.
Yeah, I saw Facebook had a seminar a couple weeks back, and they were showing their private server that they make with 100 gig backplanes built in.
Yeah, and you got to remember the big boys in there are bringing that gear in. It's not Switch; it's their customers that are bringing that stuff in. And there's always the cutting edge guys are always there they're always doing things. That's the part I miss. I love the science of it and watching the latest, greatest toys rolling in, and yeah.
So SMPTE has a new standard coming out called 2110, which is uncompressed up to 8K video.
Wow.
And one 4K 60 frames per second is 12 gigabits per second.
Wow. That's awesome.
You need a big router and switch to handle one stream of uncompressed.
So, Jeff, John, do you think COVID was good for business overall?
Absolutely.
I'm guessing, yeah.
Absolutely. It's like what you guys are doing here just exploded, as you know. I mean, education. I'm on the board for Public Education Foundation, and we watched, as you know, it had to be great for Zoom, because they just took off. And frankly, I think it's a great idea. There's a lot of entities. Our DMV, or Department of Motor Vehicles, announced that they're going to do more and more things like this to get your stuff done. The school district, of course, is, because they found out some students thrive in that environment. They do better than in the classroom. And so they're doing hybrid now, where you can pick depending on your best performance. There's banking. They're like, why do I need a branch? Why do I need bricks and mortar when my people don't have to come to work? We just found out you can work from home. We all have known that for years, but a lot of people were paranoid that their employees might have a donut when they're not supposed to. All of a sudden now they're figuring out, oh my gosh, I can track every keystroke. I can get more out of them when they're at work. And so the Department of Health and Human Services, the Welfare Department, all these guys are going, hey, it does not make sense for my employees to be, burning gas, driving back and forth, away from their home when we just found out for a year they do better at home.
That was our last episode. We did Government 2.0. We talked all about that.
Oh,
I said, let Amazon run the DMV. You'll be able to get your driver's license in 30 seconds.
It's like, why am I sitting in this chair waiting in a line? And they're close. I mean, they've always been close, but I don't think anybody, I think it's a management mentality. I think they're, oh my gosh, this guy's going to screw off if he's home, and some people will. But I'll give you an example. My daughter-in-law, who works for the welfare department, she's working from home. And she said, when they asked who wants to come back, she said she would if they wanted her to. And she did. But she said, the monitoring, every time you check out to go take your break, I mean, it was so much more intense. And the number of people you would feed is under a timer. It was just fascinating to see. They actually found out, oh, this works better than having a $2 million building and a $40,000 power bill.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot.
I saw a study where they calculated the amount of fossil fuels not being used by people not traveling to and from work, and it was amazing. So I got to go back and look at that one that you guys did, because I would love to hear.
So in the event industries, they're really concerned about the carbon footprint of these larger events now. It's becoming an issue.
I can see that. And so why not have a hybrid environment? Maybe I do want to go touch and feel it, but why can't I do what you guys are doing and take me through the booth? Show me, have a booth, that's cool. And if I really need to go see it, I'll go. But why can't I walk through it with you and ask my questions?
We're going to do that for NAB, my morning group, which is office hours. We've
Awesome.
done 460 episodes in a row on Christmas,
Wow.
on 4th of July. And we're on from 5 a.m. till 9. We specifically discuss these things. And I don't know if you've seen the numbers for NAB. World of Concrete was only 60% over 2019. NAB, there's a lot of big people not coming. And
Wow.
we're proposing to some of these bigger guys that we have an audience of a couple hundred every day of technology folks come on, and we can present them in front of that audience. And then the on-demand audience is probably 10x that size.
The air travel and the inconvenience and to me.
Yeah, when's the last time you and I walked around CES or Comdex for that matter?
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
460 is quite a number, John.
That is a number. I feel bad for those that are involved in the convention business, because it's hitting guys that are used to making, I always, the guys that set up the conventions in Las Vegas, we joke around, the highest paid part-time guys in Nevada, they can make a couple $100,000 when they're busy, but this has been weird for them, because all of a sudden they're not setting up all these shows and tearing down all these shows.
Oh yeah.
But on the other hand, it just makes sense to do so much more of a virtual. Now the upside to data center guys is people are racking up more gear, buying more power, needing more bandwidth, and it's just expanding, which I probably explains why our stock keeps going up. But
that leaves me, Jeff, I got to know, I have to ask you this before we leave, because you just actually, that leads me in, because I asked you about the big mission while you were doing stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're saying you're on the sidelines, and I kind of feel like you might be leaving us soon or whatever. I don't know what's going on, but I feel it.
I should have left, but I'm having too much fun.
I just want to know where you're going now. Do you have a big mission moving forward with all of this?
Well, myself personally, I have 12 grandkids.
Oh, wow.
And
he's a professional grandpa.
I am a professional grandfather. I have a lot of fun. There's 4 little ones that are 9, 2 7s, and a 5, and they're at my house 3 days a week, spending the night, hanging out. But I also am involved in some philanthropy. There's a there's an entity here in Las Vegas called the City Impact Center, where we provide free medical. We have a food bank. We have classrooms. We do tech training. We do high school equivalencies for adults. We have a charter school with 400 high schoolers. We just finished building a $14 million beautiful 64-unit senior housing, affordable housing center. And that's kind of where I'm at. My core focus is just family and having fun.
Do you have a core mission that's behind all that philanthropy work? Like for mine, it's to end suffering and really just heal the planet. Like, is there a big mission behind all that?
Yeah, I'm a Christian guy, and I just feel like, you can talk about being a Christian all you want, but I think you gotta have the love. You gotta show the love. And I go down there in a food bank and see we feed 500 families. And through the pandemic, we were one of only there's 45 food banks in the Las Vegas area, and during the pandemic, we were the only 2 left that were actually had walk-up people getting food. And I just feel like that's what my Jesus would do. He loves people, and so it's just that's what motivates me. It's just. And I want my grandkids to see that. I want them to know, you can help people. And our mission isn't just to help them stay homeless. We're trying to lift them up too. So we've got a homeless to homeowner plan. We've got financial training. We got, and so yeah, it's about making the world better, I guess.
I love you, because to me, I see all these people that are wealthy and I'm like, why aren't you doing more? Because until there's like nobody that's hungry, suffering, lacks education, why are you sitting on the sidelines? There's still work to be done. So Thank you for getting your hands dirty. I love you.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Darn it. I know an Angel for 7 years. She never said she loved me.
She loves me. That's my Canadian girlfriend.
You weren't listening, John.
Hey, Colin or JS, any questions before we let Jeff go on his way?
I think we've kept them long enough. It's almost an hour. We're almost at the end of the show.
Yeah, we're an hour in, but I know you and I have tons of other
Jazzy
stuff.
shirt out. I like that shirt. That's what I
With
like.
this shirt?
Yeah.
Well, I'm down here by the sea. I gotta dress the part, I guess.
All right, I guess, Jeff, we can conclude the show. We're right at an hour, so that works out perfectly. Colin, we've got another tons of content we can talk about.
This is where we pretend that I have one of those buttons.
Do we want to keep going or
like that.
or do episode part 2?
That's a good idea. We'll do part 2 of infrastructure.
Well,
Hey,
listen,
Jeff, thank
love
you
you
very
guys.
much.
It was great fun. I'll be back on and watching. I enjoyed this.
I'll put you on the list.
Thanks for joining us.
You guys have a great
Thanks,
day.
Jeff.
Fantastic. Okay, Colin, you've got the controls. Go ahead.
Yes.
Love
well,
you guys.
Thank you for joining us for episode, was it 56?
56.
56 of
We're
NerdWorld.
done?
And
Yeah.
please come join us
Done? I
again.
didn't
Will John Pretto ever escape from his white hole? Will Colin Hill ever monetize his breathless pulse escape? The answers to these and even more of the universe's greatest secrets next time on NerdWorld.